can scale the adoption of climate-smart agriculture by millions of smallholder farmers, specifically through capacity development in Africa. This latest edition of What's Cooking has generated a huge amount of interest, and we've had over 600 registrations globally. Before we start today, I'm going to give you a few of the kind of housekeeping logistics of the webinar. First, unfortunately, today's webinar is only in English and simultaneous translation is not available. Please keep your microphones on mute to prevent any background noise, and the webinar admins can mute you in the case of any disruptive background noise. We welcome listeners to pose their questions in the chat bar on the right-hand side of the screen. After the presentations, there will be a question and answer sessions. You can put all of the questions while the speakers are speaking, and they'll be addressed in the question and answer session after the presentation by the relevant speaker. Speakers are also welcome to clarify the answers to the question directly in the chat after they finish their presentation, and speakers do that if you think useful or necessary. Feel free to contact Sunil from the World Bank team through a personal chat. If you have any sort of technical issue, you can search for his name at the top of the participant list. That's Sunil with an S. The recording and presentations after will be made available on the ICCRA website. Please go to icra.cgiar.org/events, and our team will put the link in the chat and you'll be able to find it there. You will also later be able to add subtitles in a different language to the webinar. So if you need translation and you cannot get it now, you will be able to read it later. The communications team would also like me to say that if you want to share your thoughts about this event on social media, you can use the hashtag #ReadyToScale, tagging CGIAR Africa or the World Bank Group _Africa Agriculture. And we will put those tags in the chat today too. Before introducing our exciting speakers today, I want to share a bit of the context and background of today's webinar. As you know, we're here today to discuss activities of the IGAD program, or this Accelerating the Impact of CGIAR Climate for Research for Africa program. Before we begin, and in part, I think because it is so special to so many of us, I wanted to briefly share IGRA's origin story. For those of you who don't know, the CGIAR was created by the World Bank, including, in addition to Rockefeller Foundation and the United Nations, in 1971 as the only global agricultural research body dedicated to providing solutions for poor smallholder farmers in developing countries. CGIAR at the time was used to fulfill the vision of the World Bank president at the time, Robert McNamara, his vision to use agricultural science and technology to defeat poverty and achieve food security. And, you know, however many years later, 1971 until now, we are all still trying to do that, right? To achieve that mission and our vision. Since the inception of the CGIAR, the World Bank has been a strong partner, contributing $30 million a year of unrestricted funding to the CGIAR over more than 5 decades now. But the IGRA program that we'll talk about today is a new type of unprecedented financing. It's an experiment, basically, whereby the World Bank is supporting CGIAR partners and stakeholders with regional IDA, or this International Development Association financing that comes from the World Bank, directly to support partners in Africa. This new model, this pilot, as we call it sometimes, was approved by the World Bank Board in December of 2020, providing direct support for 6 focus countries to strengthen the capacity of targeted CGIAR partners and stakeholders, and to enhance access to climate information services and validated climate-smart agriculture technologies in Africa. The model is really unique, I think, because IGRA has a focus on filling what we call the missing middle. And by that, I mean it's bridging the gap between the scientists that generate the climate knowledge and innovation in climate-smart agriculture, typically led by the CGIAR, but also by many other institutions in Africa. And we have some of those scientists here with us today. And it bridges this together with smallholder farmers who ultimately hope to use these innovations. Since its inception in 2020, ICCRA has benefited nearly 5 million people with with enhanced climate information services or validated climate smart agriculture technology. It's also supported over 90 regional organizations in Africa in the project area to increasingly access climate smart services and validated CSA technologies. We will hear from two of these organizations that the ICCRA program supports today. The ICCRA program has also partnered with large World Bank operations to provide direct scientific inputs into the design and implementation of programs for World Bank client countries in Africa. In light of this achievement and this extraordinary partnership, the World Bank and the CGIAR together have prepared an additional financing to this initial program for $40 million to the program that will be presented to the World Bank's Board of Directors on March 8th, and we hope to have it approved then. The ambition for this additional financing would be to continue scaling CGIAR climate innovation in Africa. And continuing its work, ICCRA's focus would shift not only from broadening access to innovations, but also embedding sustainably the use of those innovations by communities across Africa. It's this ambition that will be reflected in today's discussion. So with those words from me about how excited I am about this program and this partnership and our collaboration and really bringing science, research, innovation to the heart of what we're doing in Africa, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. So let me introduce to you the first speaker for the webinar. They'll be able to tell you firsthand about the exciting work that ICCRA is doing related to generation and distribution of climate data in Africa. So I will hand it over to you, Tufa. Tufa Dinku is a senior research scientist at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia Climate School. Within the ICCRA project, he is the Columbia Institute for Climate and Society team leader for its activities in Ethiopia, Kenya, Zambia, Ghana, and Mali, and the lead for this program's Enhancing National Climate Service Initiative. This program has improved the availability of and access to the use of climate information in more than 20 countries. Tufa, we are delighted to have you here, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Is this in presentation mode? Let me see.
Yes, it's perfect.
All right, okay, thank you. So I am going to talk about ENACT, Enhancing National Climate Services, because the AICCRA is about climate information services and climate smart agriculture in general, like Katie mentioned. The IRI component, which is small relative to the big project, but it's also a critical component of the project. So that's what we want to talk about today. So first, I will highlight the role of IRI in the project, and then explain what ENACT's approach is and how we use that approach to develop capacity at national and regional levels in Africa. Next slide. So with regards to IRI's role, like I said earlier, the project is a big project. IRI led the fourth theme. There are 4 AICCRA teams, as you can see on the screen, and IRI been leading the 4th theme for the last 3 years. And in the additional financing that Katie mentioned, IRI will be happily handing over this leadership to an African-based institution. Next slide. So this is the objective of the AICCRA additional financing. And if you can see, it focuses on making about the availability and the use of climate information services and climate smart agriculture in Africa. And again, IRI's specific role is for the climate information services component. Next slide, please. So let's talk about ENACT now. So ENACT stands for Enhancing National Climate Services. It is a flagship initiative for IRI in terms of climate services. And as the name implies, it is enhancing national climate service at country level, number one. Number two, it is not talking about creating climate services or initiating climate services. It is enhancing what already exists in the countries. How do we do that? We have three steps. The first is, of course, improving data. Data is the foundation of any climate services. So we work with the national Met services to organize quality control and actually make the data better by combining station observations with freely available global products such as satellite rainfall estimates and reanalysis products. So first do data, but also improve forecast, help them, the national Met services, improve the forecast. Once we have the data and the forecast, now it is making access to those products easier. So we generate, translate data into information products, and then make those information products available to the public so that they can access and use it. But making available information is not enough. People need to, in first place, to know that the product exists, but also be trained on the product, on how to access and use the product, but also contribute to the use of, to the development of the product themselves. Okay, so next slide, please. So INACT is an approach, but it uses tools. There are different tools. For the data availability component, we use the climate data tool, CDT, the automatic weather station data tool, ADT, the PICPT for the forecast. For data access and use, we use what we call IRI data library and create products online that we call MapRoom products. And for enabling use at the end of the day, we are using different curricula. So I will talk more about ADT today and the forecasting tool, but also later on Amanda is going to talk about the user side of things. And there are the regional climate centers, ICPAC and AGRHYMET will also talk about more about the forecast aspect of their experience for the forecasting tool here. Next slide, please. So the first tool I want to talk about is relatively new. One of the tools that AICCRA made possible is the automatic weather station data tool. Why? Because many national Met services in Africa have started using automatic weather stations. But those automatic weather stations are provided by different donors. Because they come from different donors, there are different types of automatic weather station types. And you can see in the figure on the top right, different colors represent different automatic weather station types in Kenya, minimum 6 of them. So these 6 networks they don't talk to each other. So the data is totally separate. So we developed this tool out of necessity so that the national Met services can organize their data in one place, quality control it, process it, and then use that data. This is one of the tools now that's becoming very popular and again initiated through AICCRA. Next slide, please. So the other tool is PICPT, but for us the approach is called the next gen. That's the next generation seasonal and subseasonal forecast. It has 2 components. The first component is, of course, it makes easier the lives of national Met services because it helps them bring together global models and adapt it for their local applications, for local seasonal forecast and subseasonal forecast. But it also helps the user because this approach helps national Met services provide high resolution data, high resolution forecast at 4 or 5 kilometers. So on the right side, I'm comparing the common forecast, the tertile forecast in Ethiopia to what now the next gen can provide through the MapRoom, which is the user can decide on which threshold they want to use. They can even drill down to specific location and see the distribution of the forecast compared to the expected climatology. Next slide, please. So capacity development, of course, the big component of this. So we've been working with national climate services and the regional climate centers, number one, install those systems there, but also train the regional climate centers and national climate services on those tools. And as you can see, the coverage of the training on the next gen forecast in Africa directly through AICCRA or indirectly. And you can see that the training went beyond just the 6 AICCRA countries. And here we work with the regional based services because of many reasons. The first, of course, they use the system itself. And they will both ICPAC and AGRHYMET will tell you how they use the product, the tool for their purpose. But it also, IRI is a New York-based institution, so it is not feasible that IRI supports every country in Africa. So in that case, it will be more efficient if the capacity is transferred to the African regional climate centers, and then they can help the national climate services, which will make even the whole endeavor much cost effective. So I will stop here and let Masilin tell her story of how they're using the next gen and ADT product. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tufa. So I'll go on to present a case of how we've been using the next gen over Eastern Africa. So Eastern Africa is quite unique. So we can see from here that there are quite a number of areas that are arid and semi-arid, and we only have like a few areas that are sub-humid and humid. So this makes most of the population vulnerable to any changes of rainfall patterns, as most people depend on rain-fed agriculture. So ICPAC is a regional climate center. It's designated by WMO, and we provide forecast information over the region. So maybe looking at the interplay of factors that are exacerbating vulnerabilities. So we can see that from 2016 to present, there have been a number of extreme events. So in 2016, there was suppressed rainfall over the region. And then moving on to the next year, 2018, we had like extensive flooding during the March, April, May season. And then in March, April, May of 2019, it was largely dry, and this was mostly driven by the tropical cyclones. And then in 2019, we had an outbreak of the desert locust, and this was because we had received extensive rainfall in October to December 2019. Now we also had like persistent La Nina conditions that led to the longest drought over the region. So that was between 2020 and 2022. This was immediately followed by flooding over the region. So we can see that with all these extreme events, the region is left with no time for resilience. And it also makes it very important to provide accurate climate information for people to enhance their decision making. So the question is now, why next gen? So when you look at the next gen, its biggest advantage is in terms of automating the process of producing the forecasts. So before, what we used to use was a Windows-based climate predictability tool. So within the climate predictability tool, you needed to download the data sets and then do the calibration and then also produce the forecast. And the way we produce the forecast is we produce the forecast every month. And each month we produce monthly forecasts. We also produce seasonal forecasts. So if I give an example for the seasonal forecast, we produce seasonal forecast for rolling seasons. So we can produce a forecast for March to May, April to June, and then also May to July. And then in all this, you are downloading data for each model. We are using 9 models, and then we are also looking at 3 seasons. So one person had to do all these steps like 27 times, and we can see that that is prone to errors. So now with this tool, it's much easier to produce the forecast, and then it also saves the time. So we can be able to further develop our techniques and produce more accurate forecasts. So this is a testimony from one of my colleagues, Eunice, and she was highlighting, she's the one who's mostly responsible for producing the forecasts using the tools. So she was highlighting how easy now it is to produce the forecast. You can see she even said it's now just a click of the button and you can produce forecasts for different seasons, allowing for more time for other activities. And then in terms of capacity building activities, as ICPAC, we have invested quite a lot in building the capacity of the NMHs over the region. So we have done in-country trainings. So from here, you can see we did country trainings in Kenya and then also Djibouti. So for this, we trained mostly the forecasters from the NMHs. In Uganda, we also conducted a training. For Uganda, it was quite different. We also had the disaster risk management officers also coming to the training to also try and understand how they can actually use the outputs and also what are the limitations in terms of forecasting. We also conduct trainings once every three times a year when we are giving the forecast to before we have the climate outlook forum. So we train all the NMHs from the 11 countries over East Africa. And then also to capacity build our forecasters, we also have what is called the annual foundational training workshop. So in all these trainings, we have given our forecasters access to these tools and then also sort of like training of the trainers so that they will be able to also train their colleagues when they are back home. The next, yes. So this is a testimony from Franklin, who works with the Kenya Meteorological Department, and he's highlighting how these tools have actually helped in terms of improving the skills to a point that users feel like we are now using new machines, and he's highlighting that it's not the machines, but it's the new forecast and models that we are utilizing to produce these forecasts. So in terms of dissemination, I think we are all aware once the information is produced, if we keep it on the shelves, it does not help anyone. So dissemination is a very important part. And for ICPAC, in terms of dissemination, we are disseminating this information through different platforms. So one of it is the East Africa Hazards Watch. So in this, we integrate all the information that we have from the weekly and then also the seasonal information, which is coming from the PICPT tool. And then we disseminate through different channels. So that is through social media, through websites. And then we also have user interface platforms, which include the Greater Horn of Africa Climate Outlook Forum, where we invite users from different sectors and different countries over the whole region, over all the 11 countries. and they co-produce the advisories based on this. We also have the Food Security and Nutrition Working Group. Through this, we are providing climate information that relates to food security. And one of the things that IGAD has really contributed to is the involvement of media so that they can easily disseminate the information. So the media is involved also in the Climate Outlook forums. In terms of opportunities, so for now, the main focus with the NextGen has been on the rainfall forecast and then intra-seasonal forecast, including the onset, the dry and wet spells. But we are thinking of extending this also to include the crop yield. By calibrating using this tool, we can be able to inform stakeholders on how much they're expecting in the upcoming season. And then if you remember from the first slide, most of our region is arid and semi-arid. So agropastoralist is really something that is practiced over the region. So we could also produce the forage forecast from this. And the most important is outputs from this tool are in digital format. So if it is in digital format, then we can use this to drive other impact models. So this could also include the health models and then also outbreak of pests, which is also a problem over our region. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Masilin. And just to give a very brief introduction to Masilin now that she's done, just to mention that she's a climate modeling expert at IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, ICPAC, that she mentioned, East Africa's Regional Climate Center. In this role, she advises scientific knowledge on the sub-seasonal to seasonal drivers of climate over the East Africa region and integrates research outputs into the improved climate services. Thank you so much, Masilin, for that presentation and for representing IGAD here today. We have just heard from East Africa, so we are going to pass it over to West Africa now, and we are going to hear from our colleague Bernard Minoungou, who is a hydrologist with expertise in hydrological modeling at AGRHYMET, SILS's regional center. His activities include development of decision support approaches, tools, and products on water resources, climate, and food security. He also conducts capacity building activities for national meteorological and hydrological services in 17 West African countries. With the ICCRA program, he contributes to the adaptation of INAC's tools by national institutes in order to improve climate services. Bernard, thanks so much for being with us, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy, and hi again, everyone. As ICPAC, I will be presenting climate services and next-gen forecasting in West Africa we are providing for our member states. Next slide, please. So for those who don't know, AGRHYMET is a regional climate center in West Africa and Sahel, and our activities cover over than 17 countries in Sahelian and West African region. And our mandate include collecting, processing data, and disseminating information on climate, water, agriculture, and food security, and so on. And secondly, we are strengthening technically and scientifically the capacity of our country members and stakeholders through many capacity development activities. And our mandate include transferring tool and method adapted to West African and Sahelian region. And finally, one of our mission is to strengthen our interstate cooperation by sharing knowledge and technology. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so thank you. As you may know, the West African region is facing many challenges. No, back please. facing many challenges regarding to climate variability and change. And to cope with this, we need to have many strategies in order to cope with this. And improving the production and use of the information on climate risks is the key to coping with this new situation. These graphs show a little bit how precipitation, for example, varied in our region. And as you can see, in the past, we used to have either a dry period or a wet period, but in recent years, we can see that we have a high variability regarding to the precipitation from year to year. Next slide. And within a project funded by World Bank, which is called the Food Security Resilience Program, we have conducted a survey. And from this survey, it appeared that 74% of all users of AGRHYMET services use seasonal forecasting services as a way to deal with climate variability and change. And 58% of them have benefited of capacity building in order to better interpret the services and the product we are providing. Next slide, please. So within the AICCRA project, we are supporting our member state in implementing too many tools as presented previously by Tufa, and among them we have ADT. And as a reminder, is a tool which can help to fetch data from different network systems to pre-process and take quality control and create a unified database for use and to make some analysis and make the data easily available through some visualization and dissemination portal. Up to now in West Africa, this tool have been implemented in many countries, such as Mali, Senegal, and Ghana. And there are some activities which are ongoing in order to extend it and in order to cover the other countries in West Africa. Next. And when it comes to seasonal forecasting, we are implementing right now the next-gen tool as presented by my colleagues. And this tool is a systematic general approach that can help to co-design, implement, and produce objective forecasts as recommended by the WMO to make it more traceable and more accurate. And with this tool, we are able each year to produce information regarding the cumulative precipitation that are useful for many sectors, the onset dates required by farmers in order to better plan their activities, a dry spell to manage activities within the season and the end season. And in the hydrological aspect, we produce some information that may help the dam manager to better plan the activity related to the water sector. Next, please. Okay, and when it comes to institutional aspect, the information we are producing using next-gen tool are available in two main areas. The first one includes the countries in what we call the Gulf of Guinea region, which are a coastal area and have mostly two rainy seasons. And the big part of the West Africa where we produce information include the Sahelian and Sudanian region, which goes from Senegal up to Chad. And as an example, the information producers are useful in agricultural sector and help users to better make a choice regarding land and crop production, crop type varieties, and so on. So next slide, please. And within IGAD, we are conducting some capacity development activities. And for example, 2 years ago, we held a meeting, and the aim of this meeting was to capacity build our member state in scaling the next generation of seasonal climate forecast tool through the West African Regional Climate Outlook we used to organize each year. And we also hold another meeting in order to address gender in climate information production and communication in West Africa. Next, please. So this slide shows some testimonial from forecasters in West Africa. We used to benefit from the capacity building we are developing. And for example, Bello Ahmed, a meteorologist from NIMET, said that he really appreciates the capacity building we have conducted in collaboration with IRI in tools called ICPAC used to produce objective seasonal forecasting. And Francesca Mate, a deputy director from Ghana Meteorological Agency, also benefits from this tool. And she said that this tool make easier and simpler to produce seasonal forecasting in her country. Next, and as a perspective, we attempt to continue the collaboration with our partners in order to contribute producing forecasting with NextGen and trying to improve this information in order to meet the need of our user, mostly including impact model necessary in agricultural and water resources sector. And we will continue to produce or to provide capacity building to national meteorological and hydrological services, free trainings, and strengthen local communication and support the inclusion of stakeholders, particularly women in the activities. So I will stop here, and if there are some additional questions, I will be able to address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. I will also just say that our partnership in the West Africa region of the World Bank is strong with AGRHYMET, in addition to the ICCRA program supporting the work that Bernard just spoke about. We have a large-scale program called the Food Systems Resilience Program with AGRHYMET, working together for similar things, and the tools and support that the ICCRA program is providing to AGRHYMET also help to support this large regional program, providing information and services to countries across the ECOWAS region. So thank you very much, Bernard. We heard Masilin say how important it is not just to model and get quality information, but also to use it. Our next speaker is going to talk a little bit more about this piece. Our next speaker is Amanda Grossi. She's the Interim Science Officer for ICCRA's theme on climate information services. Like Tufa, Amanda is based at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, or IRI, of the Columbia Climate School. In her role, she provides critical support to the development and delivery of capacity development initiatives and digital initiatives, including those associated with IRI's Enhancing National Climate Services approach. So Amanda, over to you.
All right, great. Thanks for that introduction, and especially the great presentations that we just heard from our colleagues at ICPAC and AGRHYMET. As Katie highlighted at the beginning, the theme of this webinar is from generation to use, and especially the importance of capacity development and ensuring that some of the great information, and especially forecast information that we just learned about from Masilin and Bernard does not just sit at the national level, but truly makes its way down to the ground for farmers and others who need it. So the title of my talk is From Research to Practice, Integrating Climate Information into Agricultural Extension Systems in East, Southern, and West Africa. And the core of what I'm really talking about here is the curriculum development efforts that have gone on under AICCRA that target agricultural extension systems, or those who work most closely with farmers. And one of the important questions that I hope to shed light on is how can education and training on the location-specific next-gen forecast that we just heard about actually help extension officers to tailor the recommendations for farmers, especially in the face of a changing climate, right? So understanding and communicating the forecast is just one component of the curriculum I'll be discussing, but it's a really nice example of how we can practically integrate research and science into real life decision-making on the ground for farmers, for extension, et cetera, through capacity development. So why climate education? So before I go into that, I just want to shed some more light on the question of why climate education, from the words of one of our partners in Ethiopia at the Ministry of Agriculture, who really sums it up quite well. And if you don't take much else from this presentation, I hope you really fully appreciate his point here, because it's very important. He says, the problem of not using climate information to inform agriculture in Ethiopia is not an issue of not having quality climate information. The Ethiopian Meteorological Institute has very good, high quality information. In fact, they've had it for many years. The issue is about the people who need this information most not being able to understand and use that climate information. And he goes on to say, you know, this is a problem at all levels, from Ministry of Agriculture all the way up to policymakers.
We lose Amanda.
Amanda,
Yes.
I think we lost you. Can
Lost you.
can you still hear us?
Okay, I think let's go to Abdrahmane and then we'll come back to Amanda when she comes back.
Sounds good. So I think Amanda's
Sanitarian workers, their own community, and even technology. And the AICCRA approach to capacity development here rests on the idea that supporting farmers to become climate smart means also supporting the network of actors who surround them. And this is what we call systems strengthening. So next slide. Even the next slide after that. Thank you. Okay, great. So how do we do that concretely and by what mechanism? Education, curricula, okay, but not just any curricula, not just theory-based curricula, for example, with practical, hands-on, competency-based curricula that are intentionally aligned with needs and integrate and bundle, you know, this best available CIS and CSA tools and knowledge. I hope everyone knows what I mean when I say CIS and CSA. CIS is Climate Information Services and CSA is Climate Smart Agriculture. And you really have two main streams of curricula. One is those targeting universities, and two is those targeting agricultural extension. So on the formal education side, on the university side, you know, whether they go on to become policymakers, development humanitarian workers, researchers, work in the private sector, et cetera, this formal education system has an enormous role to play in actually equipping students to be climate smart and literate leaders. And then on the informal education system side, on the agricultural extension side, curricula can help extension officers already in the field, or those who have yet to go through agricultural training colleges, sometimes we call them ATIVIT colleges or ATIs, with the skills they actually need to tailor and give good location-specific and decision-relevant information to farmers. So today, just because of limited time, I'm actually only discussing the extension curriculum, not the university curriculum, which we do a whole separate webinar on. Next slide. So yeah, what are the characteristics of the curriculum approach? So I've told you now why CIS and CSA education is important, how a systems approach is really necessary to get to the root of the systemic problem and who priority targets are. But I have not told you yet what the curriculum actually is or its characteristics. We are keeping the suspense. But there are just a few general things I'd like to highlight before I go into specifics. So I've mentioned it already, but these curriculum are competency-based. So this curriculum basically targets specific knowledge, skills, and attitudes. That's all that means. We want to make sure the things that we're training people on are not arbitrary or what we think or perceive people need, but are actually aligned with, you know, what's needed in their field and their actual jobs. This is what we call skills matching. Number two, practice oriented. This curriculum is heavily practice oriented. In all of the 6 countries even exist in these countries, are generally heavily theory and also focused on, longer term climate change, not nearer term variability. And, what happens or is going to happen in 50 years is important, but there's a gap in the kind of pragmatic curricula that help people like farmers actually plan for this season, this year, in the nearer term. And then just to say that this curriculum also is stimulating demand and meeting long-standing need for this kind of education. On the demand side, this curriculum is really meeting a long-standing need for actionable information and training on climate. And then on the supply side, the curriculum is really helping users to better articulate their needs. I always use this example. If you ask someone what kind of car they want and they've never seen a car before, they're going to have a really hard time explaining what they want. And it's really the same thing with climate services. Sometimes people need exposure to existing products to know what's possible and to better articulate demand. Next slide, please. So CRMA building blocks. So I have been going on and on about curricula, but what does it actually contain? So this slide here just shows the building blocks of the Climate Risk Management and Agricultural Extension, or CRMAE curriculum. So this is that curriculum I've been telling you targets extension. And each one of these building blocks represents those competencies that I just told you about: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And if you look at the top of the staircase, you have a farmer and an extension officer holding a toolkit. And the farmer is asking some really common questions very central to their livelihood. What should I plant? When should I plant? And should I invest in inputs, insurance, etc.? So now to answer these questions well, and what I mean by well is with tailored location-specific, context-specific advice that's actually communicated in a way a farmer can understand and act on, that extension officer is going to need to have certain competencies in place. They need to build up their toolkit, so to speak, to address these questions. And that's what the 4 modules of the CRMAE curriculum seek to address. And you can see them on the bottom, and also this next slide. Next slide, please. So module 1 covers climate basics, right? So if you're going to have an entire curriculum about climate and climate risk management, you absolutely need to have a shared vocabulary and get the basics right. For example, what is climate change? What is variability? What local factors, impact the climate of Kenya, or Ethiopia? What about global factors beyond their borders, such as El Nino and La Nina? And then module 2 is really the value add and what makes this curriculum truly unique to anything else that's out there. I mentioned previously that the major complaint has been around lack of practical materials for supporting decision-making in the short term. And module 2 bundles a lot of what we call AICCRA digital innovations. For example, the ENACT map rooms that Tufa spoke about earlier. With map rooms, any user can click on a specific location at 4 to 5 kilometer resolution and understand things like the historical onset date of the rains, the length of the season, the forecast, with probabilities that rain will exceed or not exceed a certain amount for free. And these map rooms are hosted by the National Meteorological Services themselves. This is very groundbreaking. This location specific, or what some in the climate science world call downscaled climate information that's actually tailored for the agricultural sector, is groundbreaking for tailoring recommendations for farmers. It's groundbreaking for going beyond just providing a forecast to helping interpret the implications of that forecast for a farmer, and then actually plan for those implications. So this is the heart and soul of the curriculum. Module 3 is all about just connecting that information to decision making. What kinds of decisions can be informed with this information? And then module 4 is all about communication. So, it's fantastic if we have climate literate extension officers who understand climate basics, how to get that location specific information, et cetera. But if they cannot communicate this information as advice to farmers in a way that is comprehensible and they understand, it's really all for naught. So this module covers, I'll say, various evidence-driven approaches to do that. Next slide. So the resources, what can you physically hold in your hand? In each AICCRA country, there's 6 again, we have either already or are in the process of finalizing 2 main resource guides. One of them is what we call the reference guide or textbook. These are just comprehensive materials going into depth about all of the topics that I just shared with you. And then the other is the facilitator's guide or teacher's guide. So it's really, not only important what is taught, but actually how it's taught that impacts learning. And you need to keep in mind that for most of these countries, or at least a lot of them, they're teaching about these topics for the first time. So teachers who will train others absolutely need to feel comfortable teaching these topics. And this teacher's guide really contains links to all those PowerPoints, hands-on exercises and practical activities I mentioned, and gives guidance for active learning and peer-to-peer learning. And active learning is definitely not the norm in some of these areas. So who all has been implementing this? Next slide. As Katie explained at the top of the webinar, the AICCRA project countries, you can see them here, 3 in East and Southern Africa and 3 in West Africa, right? So this all started in Ethiopia. And I want to be very clear about that. We did not set off and say to ourselves, yes, we shall work to develop extension curricula in all 6 countries. No, we co-developed this curriculum in Ethiopia over several years, actually following demand and a lot of back and forth and iterative consultations on what is actually, needed to include. And then in sharing the experience of Ethiopia with Senegal and so on, it became extremely clear that the challenges the curriculum seeks to address are actually not unique to Ethiopia, but common to other countries as well, and most African countries. So this is the South-South learning and sharing. Next slide. Just so you can see who those partners actually are. This is not to give you a heart attack, this very busy slide. It's just to impress upon you that this has been an extremely collaborative effort. And I think that's one of the reasons behind the success, right? It has involved institutions and people, public and private, from all along what we call the climate services chain, right? From those who produce climate information, these national meteorological services, to those who help translate and contextualize it, so these national research institutes, and then to those who are involved in agricultural training and use of information. So these are, what you'll see here as the Ministries of Agriculture, these NGOs, agricultural colleges, et cetera. So we've been working with more than 70 different institutions. Next slide. How has this all gone? I'm not going to, or I don't want to steal Abdrahmane's thunder, who will be presenting after me on this in more detail. I just want to highlight 2 key statistics from the pilot of this curriculum in Senegal. And one is just that 92% of extension staff surveyed deem the curriculum strongly or very strongly relevant for supporting them in their professional capacities. So we're really meeting the mark on expectations of professionalizing the agricultural extension system to address the climate challenge. I think that's fantastic. And then the other is that 73% were able to cite positive examples of how the knowledge and skills gained were used to benefit producers or farmers. So some of you may be thinking at this point, this sounds great, or I hope you are, and asking how can we support this curriculum to reach more countries and what's next? And this is what my next slide is about. So having a strategy to do that's really, really important, and regional and continental institutions that play a strong role in capacity development, including Roof Forum, even Waskal, Saskal, Karaf, AICCRA, some of whom have partaken in our trainings at country level, are really important for that strategy. They're going to be vital for taking and adapting such a curriculum beyond the 6 countries I just mentioned, and really actually, sustaining the efforts at the end of the project. So I'm only sharing here on this slide that we had a really nice knowledge sharing event last July. And during that event, the demand to scale this curriculum was really very evident, including from regional educational institutions such as the IUCEA in East Africa. And also, I'd be remiss not to mention, very strongly and resoundingly articulated was a request to adapt this extension curriculum, which is largely crops emphasizing at the moment, to the livestock sector, if there are folks on this webinar who can maybe help us take on this request. So I end with this last slide, next slide, before I pass the floor to Abdrahmane from the AICCRA Senegal team to root this conversation on curriculum more firmly. And it is just a quote from an extension officer in Kenya that really shows the transformative power of this curriculum and wider initiative. He says, farmers will no longer be receiving information from just a delivery person, but from a clarifying person to explain exactly how the climate is going to affect them. These are the measures we're going to take, and these are the impacts. So this is how we move from mere access to actual use of CIS and CSA, which is the focus of the AICCRA additional finance. So thank you for your attention. And now I will hand things over to Abdrahmane for an overview. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And, I think that was extremely important to highlight how we need not just the hardware, right? The data infrastructure that was discussed by ICPAC and by AGRHYMET, but also the software. How do we actually make it work, and how can we facilitate learning related to this? I want to just highlight where we've come from and where we'll end. So as you heard from Tufa explained the generation and creation of these tools. Masilin described how these tools are being used in East Africa to model and to generate climate forecasts. Bernard discussed how these tools are being used in West Africa to do the same. Amanda just explained and described how the IRI and ICCRA program is educating people on how to actually use the outputs of these tools. We will end now as we pass over to Abdrahmane, the use of this information and training in one specific country in Senegal. So we'll discuss a case of how this information is being used by beneficiaries and farmers. Over to you, Abdrahmane. Abdrahmane Wane is the country cluster lead for ICCRA in Senegal. He provides leadership and guidance on partnership strengthening ICCRA's partnerships in Senegal and the generation and dissemination of knowledge from research and innovations. He's based at the International Livestock Research Institute, or ILRI. He has more than 20 years of experience working on livestock research and innovation. We are excited to hear this case from Senegal. Over to you, Abdrahmane.
Thank you so much, Kate. Yes, talking about sustaining and scaling capacity development are key for AICCRA project, and this presentation will be about this. Since 2021, the AICCRA project has collaborated with ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, and ANACIM, the Med Services, National Med Services, to develop the climate risk management in the agricultural extension curriculum in Senegal. The way CRMAE training modules are created and structured by IRI at Columbia University is an appropriate response to overcome the challenge observed in Senegal. Most of the challenges are about the lack of climate knowledge, inadequate integration of climate information into advisories, weak capacity to communicate and interpret climate information. Next slide, please. Data were collected in two phases using Google Forms and the Kobo Toolbox. In May 2023, extension workers underwent training with survey assessing baseline knowledge, module feedback, and trainer input. And thus, there were follow-up surveys via WhatsApp with 33 responding in November 2023. These two phases allow us to get feedback about the training, and most of the main results of this implementation will be present further. Next slide, please. To have this kind of sustaining, I think we need to have real good local anchorage. In Senegal, we have a collaboration between private and public organizations, going from the universities, national and international agricultural research agencies, public extension services, and private extension services, in which we can find agri-techs and farmer organizations. There's collaborations between the different types of organizations, allows to share a common goal of promoting and implementing environmentally friendly practices and products or services. Next slide. In this slide, we can see most of the respondents provides a response on how the CRMAE can be applied in the field. They said this kind of training can aid farmers in crop selection, seed preparation, and weather-informed practices. And trainees adapted climate information for sowing, input application, and end of season tasks. And most of them are emphasize varietal selection and planting timing. With this, they have a kind of change of strategies that include labor reorganization and infrastructure strengthening to manage climate risk, reflecting comprehensive agricultural extension efforts. Next slide. About the perception on training outcomes and engagement, the evaluation revealed 73% of extension staff note the positive impacts of climate risk management in agricultural extension, knowledge, and ANASIM weather forecast guided crop selection and cultivation decision, fostering crop back, please. Yes, fostering crop diversification and farm practices. Timely forecasts minimize harvest losses, reduce costs, and boost yield, increase income through diversified activities. We have a concrete impact of this training and decision making, and most of farmers and extension staff found it very impactful. Next slide, please. Here we would like to highlight another system developed by IGRHYMET and its partners, the Intelligent Agricultural System Advisory Tool. That is an initiative that underscores the potential of innovative tools to enhance climate risk management and foster sustainable agricultural practices in data scarce environment. Yes, that's very important to note that we are in an environment where we have a lack of data. So having this kind of information can help farmers and all stakeholders to use them for very concrete actions. And results demonstrate ICPAC effectiveness in promoting sustainable agriculture and improving climate resilience. Next slide. How to sustain? For the sustainability, I think we need to have the full involvement of national and local partners. Sometimes we can get some direct requests for mainstreaming content, including some requests coming from the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Equipment. And we have to coordinate also with and leverage the community of practice for livestock. If you're looking at most of the results we already have had are coming from crop system, and we are now working to develop all these technology in pastoral and agro-pastoral systems. That is another kind of challenge. That's why we use the community of practice as a way to mainstream this kind of innovation. Next slide, please. And that will be my conclusion and key messages. Climate risk management in agricultural extension training in Senegal empowers providers to address climate challenge in agriculture. We need to have continued evaluation, feedback integration, and adaptive approach, because that is essential for sustaining impact and fostering climate resilience in the sector. We need also to mainstream more the curriculum by supporting on advisory board and community of practice. But when we put different organizations together, we need also to overcome potential governance issues. That's very critical to make it sustainable and to make it, the utilization, in the longer term. And we need also to coordinate with and leverage the community of practice for CIS for livestock. And I think also, depending on context, we can get some specific requests, such as those from ANASIM for just-in-time knowledge and products, such as map rooms related to soil-water balance. That can be very specific to a country, but if you would like to maintain the momentum, I think we also need to take into account some their specific requests. For the main message, agricultural advisory services that utilize climate focus, empowering farmers to diversify crops, optimize practices, minimize losses, and increase income effectively. Next slide. Thank you so much. That was the last one.
Thank you so much for all of those great presentations and for the logical flow that you organized them in so we could see the entire chain of the creation of this tool to the use of the generation, to the accompaniment of training, to the actual practical training and distribution of information with farmers. We now have some time for question and answers. So if you have questions for any of the speakers, please put them in the chat and we will take them one by one. We have some individual questions for speakers and then we have some general questions for all of the speakers. I'd like to start out with one question that I think is very important for the IGRHYMET model in general and also all of the content that you discussed today. We talk in the IGRHYMET program, and you all talked a lot today about partnership. In the IGRHYMET program, I know that you also talk about pathways to scale. I'd like to put out to any or all of the speakers who would like to answer the question, what role do you see for the private sector in scaling these systems and innovations? Maybe we can start with, I don't know if Tufa, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So I think there are two things. I think that the thing the private sector need to do, but also that thing that I believe the private sector shouldn't do. So this is my personal perspective. The private sector, for me, shouldn't be involved in observations. That should be the mandate of national emergency services. That should be the mandate of the public sector. For me, the private sector is actually packaging and delivering the information, because the national emergency services, they can give the forecast, they can give the data, but they cannot go all the way to the last mile and be able to cater to the different user needs. I think that is where the private sector can play a very critical role. I think in this respect, I mean, I've been working in different countries with different country lead. I think a good example is Zambia. Zambia, where they have this accelerator program where they provide these private sectors involved in the agriculture sector with some small seed money, so that they can also some technical support, so that they can bundle the way to bundle climate information and climate smart together and serve the farmer. I think that's a very good model. Again, they have a big role in packaging and delivering climate information to the farmer.
Bernard, do you want to comment on this? I saw that you turned on your camera.
Yes, thank you very much. From our side in West Africa, we used to organize each year 2 Outlook Forum in order to include more actors, including private sector. And I think this is one way of, on our side, to make them be more involved in using climate smart information in order to better plan their activities.
Great, thank you. Abdrahmane, do you want to come in? You're on mute. I can see you speaking, but I can't hear you.
Yeah. Sorry,
yes, please, go ahead.
coming again to the private sector. In Senegal, we have a young startup helping us to disseminate all information in local languages. And I think this is a good example on how some startups can help disseminate it for the dissemination of climate information. And given the high rate of literacy, I think having this possibility to share information in local language is critical. And that can, maybe motivate private sector to be engaged in. By things that it's not enough, I think we also need to looking at what will be the business model of the private sector to help them also to sustain their business model and to make them independent to, to external funding and so on. Thank you.
If I can also just add my
Please.
voice there, I think private sector has a really great role to play. I just, I want to give like a shout out to Lursha over in Ethiopia, Jokalante in Senegal. They have really, I'll say, done great value addition to climate information services for advisories, especially in tailoring to local languages and, making them more context specific by working with the Met services. So I think there's really an enormous role for them to play, and the proof is in the pudding, I'll say, with some of the pilots that have gone on with their advisories and their work. So just a couple, real examples from the work. Thanks.
Thank you. Masilin, you're welcome to jump in. If not, I'm going to throw out the next question. And this actually is a question for you, Masilin, but anyone can jump in here. I know that you spoke a little bit about this in your remarks. In IGRHYMET, the program also does an incredible job of incorporating women and focusing on gender. Can you talk a little bit about how your partnerships have worked in a gender-sensitive way to scale this climate information services, and what specific considerations do you need to have to incorporate women fully into the generation of information, into the distribution of information, into the training, and then ultimately the use?
So in terms of gender, we have really tried to incorporate those considerations. So for example, when we are conducting our trainings, we have really tried to balance in terms of nomination of the trainers. If I can give an example, in our last foundational training, which was the 5th foundational training, we had a gender balance of 5 women, and then we also had 5 men. So we are trying to incorporate all those. And then also in our climate outlook forums, we have really worked hard to have advisories that are gender sensitive, not just looking at men and women, but also looking at the disabled. Times of when we are generating that, when we are disseminating that information, is it suitable for women, or is it a time when women are busy? And then also looking at East Africa is also a pastoral area. We also have also the young men and also men going out to head. So we try to cater for all the different genders in terms of dissemination of the climate information. I think that's what I can say in terms of what we have tried to do.
Kathy, can I share like one slide?
Please come in, yes.
Okay, let me see if I can share this slide. Is it visible, this one?
Now we see your screen. We see the Enhancing National Climate Services slide. Yep.
Okay, this one. This is the ladies here?
Yes.
So these are the top national mid service and of course regional. You can see Masilin in here. Ladies included in the regional training I think in Kampala. This is picture taken by Amanda a couple of years ago. So I mean, getting it is to show how intentional AICCRA is to include women, and to get this many women in one place as the top forecasters from their respective institutions was really very heartwarming for me. I mean, women in Africa in science is not an easy thing to come by. But again, because of AICCRA's effort, and I think I need to shout to Amanda to make sure that these women were presented. And like I said, these are the from their respective national mid services. They are the seasoned top forecasters. That's just wanted to share this. Thanks.
Thank you, Tufa. Do any of the other panelists want to come in on the gender sensitivity issue? If not, we have some more questions. If you want to come in. No. And Tufa, we're still seeing your screen. Yeah, perfect. Bernard, would you like to come in on the question around gender?
Okay, thank you. I think it appeared from my presentation that in West Africa, we do same as in East Africa, trying to take into account a gender balance when trying to provide capacity building and even advisory regarding practices related to more sensitive to climate and so on. So we even hold a meeting on this topic in order to make sure that everyone know the role he has to play in order to make better use of climate services to improve their activities. So that's what I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Amanda, I have some questions for you related to your presentation, and I'm going to give them to you in a bundle, and you can answer them as you see fit and all together, or what you prefer. So the questions for Amanda specifically is there also a curriculum that you use for farmers? What impact has the curriculum had so far? And who supports extension officers in the process of actually sharing the information with rural farmers? And then we have one question, if you plan to create any tools specifically for Mauritania.
Okay, that was a lot. Let me start from the back. No specific plans for Mauritania, but I was kind of mentioning in the chat that, you know, and also in my presentation that there are people far beyond the 6 AICCRA countries who need this kind of curriculum and, you know, would benefit from adapting this curriculum to their context. Right now, you know, we're trying to share this curriculum and others through a continental organization called RU Forum, you know, represents more than 168 universities in 40 countries. And, you know, that I put a link in the chat to that, but you can, you know, kind of look at that material and, you know, maybe take the parts you think are relevant and we can maybe think about working towards that together. But honestly, no, we haven't looked at Mauritania just because this project is Africa focused. I think there was a question on impact. Abdrahmane in his presentation, he kind of showed, you know, these 3 levels of monitoring and evaluation and learning that have gone on in Senegal, you know, looking at the impact on the actual trainers, you know, these training institutions that train extensionists, on the extensionists themselves, and then soon with the farmers themselves. So, I mean, I highlighted in my presentation that, you know, these extension staff are saying like, yes, absolutely, this curriculum is helping me to basically professionalize myself to meet the climate challenge. And I think that says a lot. We'll be doing some farmer focus groups next month and the month after to get at the actual farmer level impact of the Senegal curriculum. I do want to highlight that this is a very new initiative around these curricula, and we're still actually piloting this in most of these locations. You know, we've gotten a great start in Senegal and Ethiopia, but you know, these other countries I mentioned, we're actually rolling this out this year. So we want to be really intentional about gathering evidence, especially you know, with an eye towards sustainability and mainstreaming. We want policymakers to not have a doubt in their mind that this is beneficial to farmers. And then, you know, the evidence that Abdrahmane shared from Senegal with the different statistics and the learning that occurred and, you know, some of these testimonials, I think that is a good, you know, summary of some of the, I don't know if I can use the word impact, that's more longer term, but some of these positive outcomes that we've seen. So I think one of your questions was around the curriculum and farmers. The curriculum is about helping people who work with farmers. You know, to support a farmer, you have to support the network of actors who surround farmers. So this whole curriculum is set up for the benefit of a farmer. Is it a curriculum, you know, where a farmer is sitting down specifically and learning? No. But I was trying to highlight, you know, in my presentation that it's all around, you know, equipping that extension officer to help answer some of these questions that farmers have and help them to understand the information that's being communicated to them. Another thing I put in the chat was there is a full day hands-on participatory, you know, mock workshop process as part of this curriculum that helps extension officers or those acting as extension officers to work with farmers to, you know, look at, you know, compare climate information to their memory, help improve trust, to look at some of the, I mean, it's different in every country. Look at some of the bulletins coming out of these countries. Help farmers understand what that means. You know, if they hear the word El Nino on a radio, what does it actually mean, you know, for their country in that year or their farm, for example. Yeah, I don't remember the fourth question. I think I hit on most of them. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And I see Bernard also. Bernard, would you like to come in with something?
Yes, I think I have already addressed this question in the chat, but I will repeat myself. So Mauritania is part of AGRHYMET, and within this framework, our activities include this area. So, for example, last year, I think we held a training workshop on the tools developed so far within this AICCRA project, and staff from National Meteorological and Hydrological Services from Mauritania were part of it. And even this year, in 1 or 2 months, we are going to have a climate outlook forum, and they will be part to these activities too. So our role as a regional center is to strengthen the capacity of national staffs so that they will be able to support locally farmers and other users. So that's what I have regarding the question related to develop it in, and that may be useful for Mauritania. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. That's great. I'm going to conclude the question and answer session with one final question. And I will maybe ask Tufa to start, but then anyone else who wants to jump in, please do. How do you see AI, artificial intelligence, as potentially impacting the generation of models or of climate data in the future? How will we interact with AI in the coming months and years?
That's a tough question, Katie. I am old and AI is new. But yeah, so maybe I didn't explain one of, I did say to improve data availability by the National Met Services. What we do is we combine their observations, which are good quality, but doesn't cover everywhere. So there is, you know, in many parts of Africa, the stations are found in towns and cities along the main roads, and you go outside the roads, there are no stations. So that's a huge gap. So fill those gaps. What we do is we use satellite rainfall estimates, which cover everywhere, but are not as good as station data. And use the station data, which is good in quality, but doesn't cover everywhere. So we combine the strengths of those two products. The same for the model. So I think AI, can play a big role in actually what is the best way to do. I mean, we have some idea now, and we've been doing that for decades now. But I think AI can come in actually to say, okay, not only satellite, but we have satellite, we have reanalysis, we have station, we have other observation. What is the best way to combine these two different products so that come up with something with a better quality and a better coverage? I think that's one area where AI could help a lot. The other area is the forecast. Remember when we said what NextGen does is there are global models, let's say for Kenya, 9 of them. Their performance is different over different parts of Kenya. So what ICPAC or Kenya Med Department does is, okay, they say, okay, they use PyCPT to say, okay, which models or set of models are the best for Kenya and over which part of Kenya and for which season. Based on that, now they provide the forecast using the local INACS data, and INACS data is generated at 4 kilometers. So again, that's another area where I think AI can play a big role, not just because globally there are so many models, and all those models have their own different strengths, different weaknesses. Again, we have been doing what we can using the current technology, but I think AI, again, can play a big role in terms of improving the accuracy of the forecast, improving the accuracy of the data. That's what I can say from my side.
Thank you. And Bernard, we'll give you the last word on this.
Okay, thank you very much for this question. And I think at AGRHYMET Regional Center, we have started to investigate this field And for some application, as an example, I think 1 or 2 years ago, we had a student. As you may know, AGRHYMET has a training and research department, and there was one student which benefited from an internship here, and he worked on trying to use the benefit from artificial intelligence to make aerological forecasting in large scale area. And we know that for some applications, such as short-term forecasting, it still needs some achievement in order to use it. But for at a seasonal scale, we have already started to investigate this field, and it is quite promising. So that's what I have to add from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Yes, Masilin, we'll give you the last word now that I see your face very quickly, and then we'll conclude.
Okay, I will just be very quick. So I believe AI can help in a number of ways. So one of it is collecting also the non-traditional data sets. So now with the digital world, we have data sets in different sources, including telecoms, people posting data on social media. So we can use that for data mining. And then also in terms of improving the forecast, we can improve the forecast from now counting timescales, which are short-range timescales, all the way to seasonal timescales. And I think one of the things that we are really moving towards is impact-based forecast, where we are not just telling people what the weather will be, but we also give people information of what the weather will do. So combining using artificial intelligence to collect all this data in terms of the impacts that have been happening in the past, and then also using these advanced methods in generating the forecast, it will be easier for us to give out the impact-based forecast, which might enhance the decision-making for our stakeholders.
Wonderful. Thank you, Masilin. In the very brief minute we have remaining, I just want to reflect on everything that you've said. 1 minute, of course, is not enough, but just to say that, you know, globally, I think we know that there are no silver bullets to improving agriculture in Africa, right? But we know that the returns to research innovation are high, and as evidence has shown, including evidence from the ICCRA program, some of which you presented today, that bundling of climate smart information and climate smart agriculture instruments can help to enhance climate resilience of farmers. This new generation of CIS, what you presented today, has the ability to transform agriculture and resilience. We've seen it through ICCRA, we've seen it through other World Bank programs, and we've seen it with the reflections of farmers and of extensionists that you heard today. This is the model of how IGRHYMET is working. So for these CIS tools you heard about today, you've seen how it's supporting regional organizations accompanied by the training and extension and bringing it to the end users, bringing it to farmers. This is the model that IGRHYMET is trying to replicate with the CIS, but also with the climate smart agriculture tools. So it's this link of bringing science to regional organizations, to national institutions, bringing the training and technical assistance, and ultimately delivering it to end users. As you heard me say at the beginning, IGRHYMET has supported 70 regional organizations, and of those it supports 6 regional organizations with direct transfer of resources. 5% of the total resources under the original IGRHYMET financing went to regional organizations directly. Under this additional financing, you have heard us mention, 12%, more than double, will go directly to regional organizations for them to implement directly. The additional financing plans to do more of this kind of work in general, transfer tools and knowledge from CGIAR scientists to regional organizations and national institutions to then end users and farmers. So as a final thought, I hope that those who are connected today will reach out and be engaged and interact with IGRHYMET. The additional financing will give IGRHYMET more time and more ability to continue to expand their reach across Africa. I wanted to give a huge thank you to the panelists today. You gave excellent presentations and a very coherent storyline. And thank you to all of the participants who joined us today. I hope you will continue to interact with IGRHYMET in the future. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye.